Where shall we go today? Where shall we go? Where do you want to go today? Let's walk round Cronton! Historic village. I'll be the judge of that. It's got a historic motorway though nearby. To be fair, CJ's historic barbers. First barbers ever to use initials for its name. It's also the first place ever to have lids or hats on bins, which is historic. Also the first place ever to have those speed cameras that tell you how fast you're going. It's also the first place to ever put ladders and steps underneath doors that otherwise if you walk through you would fall to your death. It's also the first place to repurpose buildings like this one here, where they've just bricked up the wall rather than knocking the whole thing down and rebuilding a new building. And they've even done it there as well with a different door, which is brilliant. I'm loving this place, it's very historic. It's also the first village to be built near a field. The first village to have little posts that illuminate when headlamps shine on them, even though headlamps hadn't been invented for another 50 years before this was installed, and give way signs on the roads as well. First time ever. God, this place is so full of history. It was the first place to put gates in walls. Before that, you used to have to climb up some stairs and jump over on the other side. History. The first place to have archways in buildings and then block them off with windows. It's amazing, this place. When babies have them plastic hoop things with a spike and you stick them on top and they go small and tall and everything and they think it's great because they're babies and they're a bit thick. Well, first one ever was here. Sadly it was made of stone so no one could ever move it again, so it's now a permanent monument to inventions here in Cronton. Cronton's also the first place ever to have residential parking, even though the only thing they parked back then were horses. It's also the first place ever to have a TV show based in a cul-de-sac, although to stop tourists, they've got rid of the side part of the sign. It's the first place ever to have a house that had gardens and gates and things. Not just a house, obviously, they'd been invented before then. First ever lamppost ever. Although originally it was built with firewood inside it, which didn't really work very well. So it kind of got better once they invented gas and electricity. We've also got the first ever cottage with stables attached. Well, nearly. It's also the first place ever to have a timetable for buses, although weirdly it's nowhere near a bus stop. But hell, they couldn't get everything right. It's not the first place to have drives, but it's the first place to ever have drives that you can drive in and out of without turning your car around. Amazing. They're also the first people ever to invent camping, and here's an early example of a camp. First place ever to combine religion, fairy tales, and alcohol. Look, the Holy Family, bar and function room. They've done some engineering here as well in Cronton, which included realising that wooden pallets are not necessarily the best thing in the world to move large rocks around on. Although we're very near to Liverpool, they still use post boxes to send messages out to the outside world because Cronton likes being its own little bubble because of COVID. The church in Cronton is very nice, but you can't walk around it, and people don't seem to have died around here because there's no gravestones. That's because the people of Cronton were the first people to invent cremations, where you burn people and then scatter the ashes on the fields around the town, so you don't need gravestones for that. Eventually bus stops did make it to Cronton, but sadly everyone's rich and they've got cars, so it's no longer in use. They also worship the devil here. Here's Satanic Gardens, just to prove the point. Cronton is the first place to have a community centre, which is a building where people do stuff that's pretty boring and they wouldn't do at home. But they built it on the wrong side of this big road. So Cronton was the first place ever to have a pelican crossing so people could get to it. They're also the first place ever to have a cycle lane, although that's the end of it there, and scarily. That's the end of it there, it's hardly worth getting your pedals out. Behind me there is an ancient monument which was invented here in Cronton. This is the Dandelion pub, called the Dandelion because they invented dandelions here. Not many people know that, to be honest. Cronton also invented fish and chip shops like this one with the fish on the outside. Sadly, it's that small, no one could ever get into it, even to change it into someone else. If you're naughty, they'll chuck you in the stocks and throw food at you. If you're hungry, be naughty. Nah, no idea. If you're interested in the history of Cronton village, you can do a lot worse than have a look at this, which is a thing that tells you all about the village. And it's here in the village. So you have to come to the village to see it. Or just pause the video. But I forgot to mention, they were the first place ever to have extensions on houses. First place ever to have WL lines, but people just ignore them. I love that. It's because they haven't been told what they're for yet. So if you want to come somewhere that's got loads of history, describes itself as a historic village, and you know what? I'll give it that. It's very historic indeed. You just have to know where to look for the history, which, to be fair, was everywhere, including where I'm stood now, which is the village store. The first one ever. Historic Cronton. Pay it a visit. It's well worth it. Just for the history. Till next time. Bye. Where shall we go today? Where shall we go? Where do you want to go today? Let's walk round. It's also the first place ever to have. They also worship the devil here, and he's a cat. They also work. If you're interested in the history of